Welcome everyone to Service Patterns UK Community Call number 1, 4th of December 2025. I'm absolutely overwhelmed that over 100 of you have decided to come along today and talk service patterns. This call is all about figuring out what you need from a community like this to help us move service patterns forward. But before getting into that in any more detail, I'll share these links again at the end. But if you've not already joined our mailing list, you can do so at that link there. You can also follow our LinkedIn page at the link on the screen as well. And if you join the mailing list, you will get invitations to future calls and other things as we figure out what we want to do with that. But I will share invitations to the call on LinkedIn as well, so you will see it there too. I am Martin Ford-Downs. I'm a lead service designer at the Ministry of Justice in the UK. And I'm not an expert on service patterns. It's something that I've been trying to do a bit of work on myself over the last year or two. And I am keen to learn from all of you as much as sharing what I've been doing. We're also joined today by Kirsty Sinclair, who's a service design lead at the Scottish Government, and she's going to be presenting her work on service patterns with us a little bit further into the call. So why Service Patterns UK? There's a lot of interest in service patterns. There's been chat about this on and off in UK central government circles for about 10 years. COVID got in the way and slowed things down, but it's been back for the last couple of years. My context is UK central government, but I know the conversations extend well beyond that as well, into local government, into the Scottish Government and other places as well. But as far as I can see, no one's quite perfected it yet. There's lots of great theory, lots of good experimentation. I'm yet to see an organisation that says we have fully implemented service patterns as a day-to-day part of how we do the design of services. And as I said before, the presenters, myself and Kirsty, we're still learning too. So we're not coming to you as experts to school you on how to do this. If anything, I'm mostly doing this because I want to steal all your great ideas. My hope is that we can achieve more by sharing and learning together, and also that you can help shape this community. I've not made any great assumptions about what people need from a community of like this, but there will be a chance during this call for you to contribute your hopes and your asks for it. So with that, if we could jump to the Padlet, the first question is, why have you joined today's call? Please have a go at adding your comments in the first column. Oh gosh, all right. I did not realize that people were already adding lots and lots of things. That is great. We will, as we go through the call, each of the questions on the Padlet, we'll sort of take a moment to pause on them. So if you've added stuff already, that's fine, but there will be a chance to comment on questions 2 through 7 slightly later on. So I will pick out a selection of comments here. Meet the community, work the problem together, connect with others and learn together. I want to see how service patterns are used in government elsewhere and align with what we are working on at Islington. Thank you for that. We are pretty advanced with our service patterns at BT, but I think our pattern definition and work varies a fair amount, so it's good to cross-compare. Thank you, Tom. Looking to explore and map patterns in my organisation. Curious about how service patterns might work in practice and value. This is great. There are so many comments there. Thank you. I'm not going to read them all out on the call, but one of the reasons for using the Padlet is it means we've got a good record of what was said on the call, and we'll do some analysis of what people are saying afterwards as part of our figuring out where to go next. So let's move on to question 2, if you haven't already added. Where are you on your own service pattern journey? Are you just starting out? Have you actually worked it out and you can tell us all how to do it? Please share your thoughts. Understand what they are in theory, but not yet seen them successfully implemented at scale. Struggling to connect service design, including patterns, to content standards that actually represent any service. Created a few ad hoc. Did a deep dive 2 or 3 years ago. Just started in a new org and I did some work on patterns in the previous role. A lot of people saying just getting started or infancy, which is all good. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All right. We'll come back to the Padlet a little later on, but we're going to intersperse things with a few presentations to sort of get us thinking. Firstly, what do we even mean by service patterns? These are not necessarily a representative sample of definitions, but they're just ones that I've seen and thought about in the past. So at the Ministry of Justice, we're saying service patterns are a structured way of describing repeatable user tasks that can be combined to build or shape end-to-end services. The Scottish Government website says service patterns are evidence-based solutions to common service design problems. But did you put that together, Kirsty? I know that's out on like, yeah, not sure. Okay, fine. And then TPX Impact, who are design agency that have been working in service patterns too, they've said the idea of service patterns is to create a replicable modular approach to shape services from start to finish to meet user needs. This approach looks to identify and map reusable components that make up the building blocks of end-to-end services. I think in my experience so far, we can largely agree on the general shape of these top-level definitions, but they're not detailed enough necessarily to get under, but what do we mean by building blocks and components? Like, how detailed are these things? What are examples of them? Again, we're going to get into that, but for now, just jumping back to the Padlet, what would you include in a definition of service patterns? So you don't need to give me a complete definition. You can if you want, if you have one. But what do you think ought to be part of a definition of service patterns? I'm not persuaded that we do need a universal definition of service patterns, but perhaps that would be helpful. And maybe if you have ideas to contribute, that's something this community could work on together. Question 3 on Padlet. Again, I'm just going to pick out a few comments. A user-centered definition, like recipes, Lego. A reusable evidence-based solution for user needs or tasks that appears across multiple services. I think guidance and training is essential. Too big to explain here. Oh no. For us, it's a reusable stage of a journey that spans across all products and all channels and all brands. Thank you. A reusable solution to common problems that occur across multiple services. Easy to use and understand. Brilliant, thank you. I don't think I'm seeing anything too wild there, but I am noticing there's maybe more of an emphasis coming out in the comments on being user needs focused, which I think is interesting. Thank you. So moving on again, as well as defining service patterns, getting into the next level of detail down, what do we think they do for us? Again, I think the default place for this is often to think about them as being things that help us build services, but actually service patterns could be, and these are not mutually exclusive, but they could be a framework to describe the services you offer. I'm often thinking about Kate Tarling's work on the service organization here, if you're familiar with that. So, so even before we build new services, just getting a handle on what services do you offer today and how can understanding them by service patterns help you organize your organization. They are possibly a way to make it easier to reuse what has already been built just by identifying with common language stuff your organization already does. And then getting more into the building block idea, how could service patterns be a way of speeding up service development? Is it a toolkit for engaging teams to design new services? I think this is, Kirsty, you're going to share a bit of that in your example, where maybe it's less about us as designers, if you're a designer on this call, and maybe it's more about how do we engage other stakeholders and other professions in the process of putting together a service. Is it about a library of reusable components? Is it more about guidance or insight on things like shared or common user needs? It could also be a governance mechanism to deliver more consistent experiences. What if this was actually in the hands of our delivery managers and senior stakeholders when they are commissioning new work and shaping things? If they approached it as this new thing we need to do is understood by its service patterns, how does that help us size the work? Or is it something else? So again, briefly back to the Padlet before we move to a presentation. What do you want to achieve with service patterns? What problem are you trying to solve or thing are you trying to make better? Again, sharing a few comments. We've got speed up creation, easily create accessible and well-designed service interactions across the service. Support teams with low design capability, deliver user-centric services. Thank you, Lawrence, for that. Clarity on success measures, reduce costs, save time, improve experiences. Don't need to reinvent the wheel for very common things. Save time, make it quicker. Excellent. Again, thank you everyone for your comments. We will take all of these and do some analysis on what you're saying. Right, with that, I'm going to move on from questions. We've got two short presentations today. One, if you're not already fed up of my voice, is me talking a bit about what we're doing with service patterns at the Ministry of Justice. And then we'll be handing over to Kirsty pretty quickly to tell us about her work too. So super briefly, at the Ministry of Justice, we've got a number of projects contributing to an overall agenda of sharing and reusing things, where we want to make it easier to reuse things across the whole of the public sector, as well as within the Ministry of Justice. That includes our traditional design system, but we also want to bring in things like reusable engineering components and service patterns. So in that context, we position service patterns as being related to, but not quite the same thing as the patterns that you find in design systems today. Whilst design systems typically focus on digital interactions for relatively specific actions and tasks, we see service patterns as being a bit broader. They need to include channels that go beyond digital, and they're more focused on guidance on things like common user needs. They should still recommend appropriate digital components and patterns, however. We think they describe more complicated tasks than you typically find in design systems, and so they need to cover a variety of scenarios. If applying for something as a service pattern, then it is reasonable that applying for a parking permit will look and feel different from applying to become a foster parent. So service patterns end up being slightly less specific in order to fit those different use cases, and are just focusing on the bits of the service that we think are most likely to be shared across all services of a particular type. To define our service patterns, we asked all of our teams that were building products to describe in their own words the tasks that their services enabled people to complete. And we did some sorting and iterating of those, and we got to these 9 keywords that we believe cover the majority of things people interacting with our public services need to do to achieve their goal. Now, there are a number of different definitions out there of what are the service patterns. You'll see in a moment that Kirsty's got a slightly different breakdown. I think for the most part, the overall shape is similar. It's more a question of what's the right level of detail for how far we cut these down. Are these too big? Do they need to be slightly smaller? Again, this is something that I think a lot of people are still trying to figure out. Very briefly, here's how we've broken down the parts of a service pattern. So if you have an end-to-end service like getting a passport, we think you could describe that by a number of service patterns that make it up. So you would apply for your passport, you might need an appointment to prove your identity, a decision will be made and you'll be informed of the outcome. And then we think if we approach service patterns as being about steps and tasks, you could break down those patterns further. So applying might start with preparing to apply, submitting your application, giving evidence, and you could take that down to another level of detail as well. The bit that I'm particularly interested in is the section on the side, which, oops, sorry, went too quickly there, that we refer to as guidance. So what are the common or shared user needs? Scenarios, which is the way of anticipating happy and unhappy paths through a service to avoid dead ends. Recommended components, case studies, and other types of rich content information as well. At the Ministry of Justice, we've experimented with this in prisons where people in prison need to request things, and that's done over multiple services using a variety of channels, and they're all managed by slightly different teams. That could be requesting to see a doctor, it could be requesting to have a replacement item in your cell. And so we took a service pattern approach to try and set a blueprint for what that should look like consistently, whichever team was working on a service of that type. We laid it out like a service blueprint in this case. I don't know if this is the right format or not, but that's what one of our experiments were. Another experiment I've been involved in is a cross-government working group, very much a grassroots group, that we're trying to see if service patterns could be shared effectively across multiple UK government departments. We got several departments together and we created some, we call them proof of concepts for these. We only looked at a couple of categories of information, user needs, sub-patterns and user scenarios, but we did find that for the departments involved, we could get to a position where there were a set of user needs that we thought, if not always relevant to people applying for things, they are usually relevant. And so we're not proposing this would replace the design process, and we still think you would need to validate these when building a service, but we are saying treat this as a starting point. Don't spend time learning something that we're already pretty confident about. Invest your design time and your research time into what makes your service new or different, or iterate further on the pattern. So we're getting more value from design time and not repeating stuff we already know how to do. I've gone through that super quickly because I've given that talk before and some of you have probably heard it and there are versions of it online, but I wanted to give you a brief introduction to how we're approaching it. I've said questions on the slide, but I think I would rather give a bit more time to Kirsty to present her work. So rather than doing hands up right now, if you have any questions about what I've just presented, maybe put them in the chat and I'll keep an eye on there for the next moment. But I would love to hand over to Kirsty next and give her a good amount of time to share her excellent work. So Kirsty, are you able to take over the screen share?
Give that a go. Let's give that a go. Let's get to the top of slides. Yes, hello everybody. I'm working on one screen today, so I'm going to share your own faces and then hopefully this one. That's all come through. Lovely. Slightly dull Scottish Government title slide there, everybody. It's lovely to come along today and to see so many of you. We kind of wondered how many folk would come along to this first experiment of bringing all the folk who are either doing service patterns work or interested in it, getting started in it, keen to learn from others, which I suppose is the camp that I'm in at the moment. Similarly to Martin, we've been sharing quite a few of these talks in recent months, so you might see some slides that seem familiar if you've come into one of those before, or you've found our recorded voices somewhere on the internet. Always makes me keen to wear a different outfit for every talk so that I'm not just the same square each time showing the same stuff. But the thing I find by sharing this work is that it's really struck me as such a method of working that requires a lot of talking. And I know we get quite comfy in those spaces as designers, talking about the wording and the naming conventions and the hierarchies of things. But I'm really keen that we've reached this stage of the work where we're able to share a bit more stuff. It's starting to turn a little bit more tangible. It's starting to transform itself back into our project work. So it feels like a nice time to share the experiments that we're doing at that stage. So that's what I've got in these slides to share with you all. So a little hello from me. This is me, and how to get in contact with me. If you're at a similar stage in your work, that would be magic to chat more and to show some stuff in depth. So please do get in contact if you're on the GovUK Slack. That's probably a really good place to do that. But if you're not on that Slack, email is probably the best place. If you send me a LinkedIn message, I will read it and then instantly forget it. I have learned, so not best for me. So that's where to find me. Today I'm going to chat a little bit about why we're working in the service pattern method, and what we've been making, what we've got in terms of our patterns, and also the experiments that we're starting to take them into. So the reality in Scottish Government is that for a number of years, we've been making quite a lot of reusable pieces. We have this sort of like, I tentatively use the word suite of things. We've been designing a lot of stuff. We've got our design system, which is constantly added to. A lot of these pieces are constantly added to our service standards that we take big projects through to make sure that they're sort of meeting all of the user needs and tech needs. We've got service manuals to help teams who are organizing themselves to do either digital or non-digital work. We're starting to build big platforms, either sort of like cloud hosting or ability to verify your identity or to make payments. outward from a service. We're starting to build in sort of set technological components that can be repeated and reused across a variety of services. So the ability to like do forms really well, or to register yourself for something really well, or to send out secure messages, for example. So we've got quite a lot of stuff which is in itself is designed to be reused. We're not doing a great job of helping teams to find all of these things and use them in a bit more of a combined sort of method, which means I'm really excited about this idea of the reuse library and how do we sort of help folk to navigate through that and combine the pieces that they could be using a lot better to bring to sort of put their projects together. So what's the stuff that we've already got that we've worked on for a number of years, but how do we actually just help people navigate through it and pick the pieces that are going to be best for them in their project work? We think that service patterns can help to bring all of those pieces together and help to sort of, with a little bit of navigation help to guide people through that. Because we're thinking that, of course, we can sort of by jumping people through the process a little bit and all kind of helping them to create a first picture of what their service needs to look like in the building blocks that exist along that. By saving time in doing that first construction, are we therefore saving money? And also in terms of building things that feel like they have that consistency, that look like they have that consistency, that are built and sort of built with the infrastructure of having that consistency, does that help to sort of build trust with our user base and also the people who are continuously updating our services as well? So we're looking to do that. Am I on the right one? So this is kind of just what we talk about in terms of services. So Martin talked about applying. If you're applying for a parking permit, if you're applying to be a foster carer, if you're needing to check something before you actually kind of get started, if you're wanting to renew something, maybe that's an annual process, maybe it's something you do as and when. If you're looking to apply something, what if that looked, felt, and was built the same? So we're kind of thinking about the layers that patterns can work into and how it makes people feel, act, and kind of behave. Now, we've been using the analogy of recipes. I know that came up in the chat at the moment. As you read about different ways that people are doing service pattern work, you see building blocks, you'll see Lego quite a lot, you'll see different sort of tangible analogies brought into it. We're using recipes at the moment. It seems to be working. So we think about that as having this sort of method that in front of you and that you might need in order to design or improve upon your service. It's going to show you what it's going to look like. The critical thing that I find when using a recipe book, what you're going to need, so your ingredients, how to put it together, that's probably the step that folk find hardest, and how it should then operate, how it should then just kind of be worked and shared with other people. So as an analogy, that seems to be working for us. Borrow it if you fancy. Now, in Scottish Government, we're finding with our service patterns that we're kind of designing for two different user types at the moment. We've got the folk who are a little bit clued up and working their way through the reading lists of service patterns. They're kind of happy to talk about them as a sort of theme and a method. Typically, those are sort of user-centered design professionals. It might be our technical architects or people who are kind of like in and working on maybe more of our sort of transformation projects or programs or our projects there. There's not loads of us, and the reality is that we've not been able to hire people for the last few years. So we've not got loads of people working in these areas, and those of us who are here can't spend very long on projects. Budgets are tight, time's tight. But we are also working with a set of tech components. So these people are kind of used to sort of not languishing in a like big, massive, messy double diamond. They're kind of restrained to work quite quickly through what have we got available, what do we know already, what similar projects might we have done previously, how can we get a quick solution proposed for a team and worked with through them so that we can work through to delivery into first prototypes to proof of concepts to things that can be taken out for consultation. So we're working with those people in mind because those are the people that tend to sort of knock on the door and say, have you built the patterns yet? Where's your library? Can I kind of see what you've got? And our second group of users are the people who have been largely tasked with making service changes. So they are coming with requests and kind of saying, you know, we need to make updates to our websites, or we are needing to implement this new policy that's been decided, or we are needing to restructure our data and how we are processing and managing that. Can you help us with that? So largely they're working without UCD support. They're kind of in a sort of more policy or sort of service ownery type role. And they're needing support to make use of these reusable parts, all those blue bubbles that I was showing in the early stages. So I don't know if this kind of setup feels familiar to other teams and organizations, in terms of you've got the people who are kind of like speaking the language and are ready and wanting to see more of the material. And you've got the people who are kind of needing the material, but it needs to probably be translated in order to best help the starting point that they're coming from. So keeping these two user types in mind as we start to our experiments with and our kind of production of assets and artifacts with that. So what have we been making? We talk about service patterns as recipes and as these building blocks or ingredients throughout it. So typically, if our services look like these linear journeys of things that are experienced over time, what we did is we started with those journeys. We kind of went into the main services, the main journeys, and we looked at the steps and the stages and blocked them out. And that's been a process that we always go to whenever we start with a new piece of work, is actually start with a journey and then take a look at what are the blocks that make that up, rather than the other way around. So we're looking at the repeatable actions. We're looking at the ones which are repeated across services as well. So that's a really nice way to get your list together if you're getting started on this work. So, and looking at the ones that I've got highlighted within this journey, for example, is the moment where the value is delivered back to a user. So yes, they've got to do quite a lot of tasks, usually when they're giving away information, before they get that value back to them. So where are you setting your importance, and how are you getting yourself organized so that the person can get to that stage kind of as quickly as possible? So taking a look at the sort of give and take of our service patterns and our data within that. We've started to think of our building blocks as almost having little sort of pictorial elements as well, sort of like, so different ways that you can represent them and give a person an idea of the type of things that are happening within that sort of phase of the journey. And that can help to get started on their thinking in terms of like some of the interactive elements and sort of the more design system components that might be at play at each of these stages. That relates really well when you're designing a digital service, but it can be a nice place to start if you're designing on other channels as well. So we tend to start with plotting out the journeys and having a think about the sort of the action-based words that fit along that. I've got a number on this screen that says about 39 building blocks, with an asterisk that says this number will grow in time. It will continue to switch and change, and I feel like every time we present this work, it probably has changed. So at the moment, we're kind of starting to group our service patterns, because 39 was too unwieldy a number to really continue sharing. So we're kind of, at the moment, we're thinking about them in terms of the patterns that exist in early stages of a service, largely when people are discovering, supporting, finding, and get ready. In a digital context, that's kind of all the stuff that you do before you log in. So you're not necessarily sharing personal information or exchanging data at that particular point. You've got all the stuff in the middle, which I've highlighted in orange, which is all the kind of more transactional stuff, where you are largely sharing information with a service, maybe getting to the point where you are getting your information back, getting the thing which you want to achieve from that service, so that something can happen in your life. So all of the sort of back and forth of information and the more sort of transactional stuff in the middle. And then our section in pink at the bottom, which is kind of like I find really interesting, the ongoing service stuff. So is it a service which happens once in your life or at a particular moment? Is it something which you loop through annually or as things update or change for you? What are all the methods that we have to have in place around people challenging or appealing or updating and managing their own data with a service? And how does that sort of relate and exchange across multiple services? So different levels of stuff going on there. And that helps us to group all of our patterns. So this is the list that we've got there. This slide says 37 because it's been updated since the last one. So we're as we're working on our projects, we're just updating these. So feel free to screenshot or save these if these help with your work in terms of how you're calling things, how you're naming stuff, what the difference is between some of them that might feel quite close to each other in terms of naming conventions, or how you might want to use them differently. I find the conversations around the naming of service patterns partly quite interesting, but also quite time-sucking. We can really get drawn into this part of the work. It's important to get it established. It's really important to share it with your organisation and to be up for it adapting. I don't think we collectively need to create universal pattern naming conventions across all of us, because the important thing is that it works within your organisational setting. So if there are some words here that clash with how your organisation thinks about certain things, take the pattern and adapt it, I think, is what I would suggest when that's kind of scale. So that's the patterns that we've got. We're now in the stage of putting those into action. So we took our, I'm going to say 40 and wiggle my hands, because that number will be about 40. We've made them into a little card set because designers love card sets. And we've taken them out for little workshops with teams who are wanting to get started on their project ideas. So they come to us and say, we want to do this particular bit of our service. We draw them out an empty journey map, essentially, and they can work their way through the available patterns and almost kind of plot their user journey with that. So they do it as a team exercise. They first of all tend to talk about the journey, talk about the sort of start and end points, talk about the main stuff that they would like people to experience over time, the stuff that they maybe want to do a little bit differently from how it runs at the moment, and the things that they would want to improve in terms of like their data capture or storage or maintenance, or how they deal with renewals or updates or ways that people can contact them and stuff like that. So we let them have a discussion around that, prompt and facilitate as necessary. They then tend to take the pack of cards and almost kind of divide it into two sets. We found they're kind of like, oh, we don't need this one, but we do need this one. And they kind of create these piles on the table. And then they take the pile of stuff that they do need and they kind of work out the order of it. So it works quite neatly, and it's kind of evolved a little bit organically in terms of the steps and stages that are best to facilitate a team through. They'll then layer on information in terms of what tech pieces they might need to support that bit. Like here's a bit where people log in, or here's a bit where they're using a form for stuff, or here's a bit where we need to send notifications back out to them. So here's like the blocky stack that kind of needs to sit alongside it. And they'll layer in information about specifics, because people tend to see the approach for patterns and say, oh, but my service is very different. My service is very unique. Something off the shelf or a template will never work for us. So we want to take the opportunity to listen to that and recognize that comes from a really honest place and it should be listened to. So it's a point to ask questions. It's a point to say, so how does this need to be different? How does this need to be specific for your question? What adaptations can we make? What tweaks and what changes can we make within this pattern to make it broad enough to fit for your service? So that's a nice learning point to test them, essentially. And I think it's a necessary part of any service plot out for that. So as well as doing it on card sorts, we're testing a digital version of this as well. So this is just a Miro board where we plot out each of the patterns and kind of lay out an empty user journey again for teams, and they will literally it's two layers. One is locked, one is not, and so they can drag and drop the patterns in the right order along their user journey, and that looks a bit like this. When teams do it in practice. This is ones that we did with a policy team. So you can see that there are patterns that they picked from the list that have got the little white boxes with the descriptions. The ones that are just blue boxes are the ones that they added in. They were like, oh, actually, you're missing this pattern, so we would need to add. They're contributing to the list kind of in real time. And then everything in orange is the sticky notes that we layered on that are particular to their service. So you can kind of see the weighting between stuff that we had, stuff that they brought, specifics that were layered in. So it's really important to kind of host that as a bit of a session to take folks through. As much as we would love it for people to kind of go through a kind of self-serve process with the patterns and kind of be able to say, here's a list of 40, I need these 6, I'll arrange them myself. We're not seeing that as the reality that people are kind of working through. They're finding that they need a little bit of hand-holding, they need a bit of reassurance, they need a bit of facilitation and kind of the comfort of being helped through that process by be it design professionals or be it other folk that are kind of skilled up and able to take folk through that process. So some of the stuff that we're testing is not only how the format of how people are arranging the patterns into journeys, but sort of the support that they're needing alongside doing that and the conversations that happen. So some ideas we're working on. I'm aware of going through this at quite a quick pace, but we can chat through it more towards the end of the call. So we're getting a lot of requests from, like I said earlier, that's their second user group. So folk who are tasked with making a change in their service organisation. They don't necessarily have design support available to them. Can you help us digitise our service? You're probably hearing this quite a bit in your organisation. So, but we don't really have the design team or the ability to deep dive within each and every request that comes in. But we do have this set of tech components. We've got these sort of moments of providing a service and providing the infrastructure of a service. And we've got these patterns to compose your service from. So can we help teams to kind of orchestrate or kind of put together that first version of their service? And really, can we help with the first of the diamonds, essentially, so that we're not doing big discoveries over and over again. We're saving time and money in that respect, but we're providing a bit of a method and a toolkit to get people to the point where they've composed their first prototype. Not necessarily with a big discovery behind it, but something which can be taken out and tested in terms of its assumptions, and really emphasize iterating that. So we want to get people to that first kind of proof of concept or first prototype really quickly. We're aware that picking and choosing from 40 service patterns and creating your own journey is quite a big ask of people. And it's also quite a big ask of us as a team to kind of take people through that session, that workshop, time and time again. So we're wondering if there's a bit of similarity in terms of the things that people are asking for. So rather than putting up absolutely everything that they can possibly choose from, can we do a little bit of that preemptive work for them and kind of recognize that there might be a journey made up of patterns for services where people are registering for something, or for services where people are getting a physical thing, where they're getting some money, for when they need to check something, for when they need to update something. Could we do a bit of sort of foundational work to almost kind of script the types of journeys that happen most frequently within our services? And can we start to draw those out for people? This might look a little bit like this. This is one that I've drawn for you needing to register a thing, which you might need to do as an individual, you might need to do as a business, you might need to do as a charity. So is there a kind of ordering of a set number of patterns that kind of form themselves into this type of service journey? And can we do a bit of that first step for teams and kind of saying, this might not be right for you, but this is a starting point, and kind of saying, actually, if you're a service where people need to register for something, do you want to take this journey and do you want to work from it? Reorder stuff, add more stuff in, make the edits as you need to, but you're not starting with that blank page. We kind of think that by offering these bundles, we can give people a bit more of the shopping list for the ingredients that they're going to need for that recipe. So we're kind of saying, well, actually, if you're wanting to provide a digital service where people are getting registered for something, here's the stuff that you definitely need to have. Like, these are the non-negotiables. These are the things that are probably going to be essential. This is our best guess. It might differ in your service context. And then here's some stuff that might be optional. It might be that you're a service where people do renew stuff over time. It might be a service where people do pay for stuff. So that's an optional one, and therefore the refunding of that. It might be one that involves assessments or inspections or things like that. So that, again, kind of providing those in an optional bucket and the way that I've drawn them in the journey is to put dotted lines around them to say, like, these are things which might not fit for everybody, so you could just elapse them if you're not needing. So putting together the baseline journey and also the shopping list of ingredients for teams to kind of say, could this be a quick way of getting you started, and or just to host the conversation around that to kind of jump them forward as much as possible. The other thing which we're starting to look at is how do we document each of our patterns. We keep in the sort of service pattern community talking about having these libraries, or one main library, with like almost like a one pager for each of our patterns. So we're starting to do the work on that. It's been the toughest bit for me in terms of getting that started, of actually sort of downloading what we're learning from the actual project examples and working out what of that content is going to be most useful for our two different user groups. How do we test it? How do we take it out? Which of the patterns do we choose to kind of get started with? And I think the thing which I'm finding quite difficult with this is that what you can see on the page at the moment is like, yes, we're making assumption that there's going to be like high level information upfront about each of the patterns, sort of written information about like, here's how to use it, here's the start and end points, big things to consider, the big sort of nudges in terms of making improvements in your service and it. And then we know that there's going to be finer detail in terms of like, here's what it should look like on a page, and here's maybe some of the components and interaction styles that might need to work on it. But what I wanted to lay out on this slide is kind of the bit in the middle. It feels a bit difficult at the moment, and I wonder whether this is a community where we could work on that a little bit together. That would certainly be the piece that I would really love to work on with other people at the moment. Is I feel like we can do a great job of talking about the very top level in terms of like the one-liners, or the one words of what each of our patterns are. And I feel like we've probably all got great baseline kind of interactive elements in terms of our components and our design systems, in terms of what those pages should be made up from. But the bit in between, in terms of, are they templates, are they near templates, how much guidance do we give people, how varied do they need to be, how adjustable do they need to be, that bit in the middle feels really grey and a little bit wobbly and a little bit like we need to prototype in order to work that out. So that's the space that I'm looking to work into next, and to try and work out some of those level of details and formatting around that. And if anybody else is in that space, I would love to team up and do a bit of that thinking together, so that we can share some of the stuff that we're making that could hopefully help some folk who are earlier in the journey at the moment. At the moment, I'm getting to trial it all out in a team. So I'm part of a team who help folk from public sector organisations all across Scotland who need help with their digital projects. Rather than matching them up with a delivery team right from the word go, we're setting up a little bit of a process to preempt that, to kind of take them through this process of, what are you needing to do? What could that look like in terms of a picture and a journey? What does your process need to look like? What do your requirements need to look like, so that that team can go towards a delivery phase with a first prototype, with something to take out and validate their assumptions, test their assumptions, and almost kind of like work into their first loop of iteration right from the word go. So it's not a completely new idea, but it's something which we think should be established in order to help sort of set up our big delivery projects and almost kind of make the use of all the reusable parts that we have so far and just help teams to navigate and stitch them together a little bit better. So I'm getting to trial a lot of this stuff out in our project work at the moment, and hoping to feedback on a lot of how those experiments are going. I'm going to pause chatting at the moment. Hopefully that's given a lot of moments to jump into. I'm on one screen, so I will jump into the comments and questions and work into that in a sec.
Thank you so much, Kirsty. That was amazing. I said at the start that the presenters weren't experts, but if anyone's getting close to it, I think it might be Kirsty. So thank you for sharing that work. And I love how the presentation expands every time I see it. There's more to be said. We're a little bit short on time, but I would love to do at least 5 minutes of questions, and I would love to give a chance to hear some voices on the call as well. So if anyone would like to come off mute, please raise your hand, and we'll take you off mute, and we'll have hopefully a chance for a few questions to Kirsty before we wrap up with a few more bits on the Padlet. So would anyone like to come in? If no one wants to, oh, okay, we have a couple of hands. Excellent. Now I've got to figure out how to take people off mute. We've got Keith, I think, first. So Keith, I'm going to take. Oh, Keith, that's you on. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I'm being really cheeky here because I put it into the chat, so I feel rude having 2 bites of the cherry, because someone might come back to it. But it was just if either of you could sort of share any experience of applying service patterns as you move up the sort of continuum from transactional services to more relational based services. So I was thinking in the context of local government, where there's many services which are much more relational. There's still an awful lot of common problems and common, like trying to achieve common outcomes for citizens, but there's a whole variety of different ways of doing that across local government, and I'm just wondering if you guys have sort of strayed into that territory where the service patterns just become much more difficult.
I have a quick thought on that, Kirsty, unless you want to come in. Just I sometimes wonder if service patterns is actually a useful name for this, because I think patterns in general can cover a lot of things. And something that came to mind with what you were just saying is there's like a pattern library out there for, I think, supporting people with mental health conditions, for example. And it's the sorts of information they're sharing for that is quite different from what we're getting at here. So I think my instinct is I don't know whether that is what I'm thinking of as service patterns, but I think it is definitely a space for reusable patterns of a sort. It might be a different type of thing.
Yeah.
Kirsty, do you have any?
I think that's a great one. Is that Projects by If?
I can't remember right off the top of my head, but I know it's online somewhere.
Look that up. Short answer, Keith, is no, we're not quite in that space just yet. I think the transactional ones just feel easier to get started on and to get the buy-in and to potentially measure as well, which is often a question that we get asked. But I think the reality is that a lot of the actual implementation of them is not going to be clean cut. We need a new service. We need a new way of doing this service. So it's going to be in those more messy spaces. It's going to be in that. So I think it's worthwhile delving into that work in time as well, in terms of how you name things, how they're structured, do they work to similar moments as well. It's going to be really keen to keep an eye on.
Great. Yeah. Well,
should we keep chatting?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This great topic. Really interested. Thank you very much, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks, Keith. It looks like Izzy is up next.
Hi. Yeah. Thanks. This all sounds amazing. And as ever, I always go into meltdown when I think about how brilliant these things are, and then I worry that they end up languishing in a black hole because of the lack of raising awareness and getting people to know that they're there, how to ask for them, who to speak to. And that includes over time. So, there's often this one shot at getting awareness raised about a thing being there, but then people leave and new people join and they don't know the thing is there, and gradually it just disappears. And with something as important as this, it would be, it would be such a shame, wouldn't it? Because you want to get it out there, and especially the preemptive stuff, which I hope isn't seen as a luxury when you're going in to help set up delivery teams and stuff. Something like that. It really should be an essential thing. So my question is about how would you raise awareness and keep pushing it in an ongoing way that makes sure people know it's always there?
What can we learn from the stuff that has maybe fallen by the wayside before, the stuff that has kind of been that seemed really like brilliant, but folk have either kind of tucked away in a corner or not linked to enough things, or
or like other people say, it's created on Mural, and then access to Mural is, revoked, or it's down to technologies and where things are based sometimes as well, isn't it?
Exactly. And how distinct do you get with its usage? Is that an optional thing, or is it sort of like a process that you need to go through before you're procuring something? For example, if you're looking to get budget for something, do you actually need to prove that you've maybe taken a look at the reusable parts and what can you pick and choose from? Maybe is it like do you go as strict as saying like this needs to be part of our standards? This needs to be part of something that could be sort of proven or disproven that you've actually kind of used. So, or is it something which we provide as a bit more of the toolkit to our policy teams or to our design teams to kind of say this is a way that you can quickly prototype, and this is a way that you can kind of make pictures and make examples of what your services could look like to help with your conversations. So I think it's a really good question, and I'd love to chat more with our comms and marketing teams maybe about sort of how to structure it or how to get the messaging out there and how to where to pitch it, so that it can be a useful tool for folk.
And when teams are spun up, it's how to embed this thing into those teams when they're spun up, so it becomes an automatic part of setup of new delivery teams or new projects, isn't it?
I think there's something to be learned from the existing design systems on this. I think maintaining this is something that will take time and people and a place to go to. But even then, we have multiple design systems across the public sector, and even within organisations with their own design systems, you've still got people who don't always look at it and start again. Like, this is not. I think there are lessons out there, but it's not necessarily one that we will 100% solve. But yeah, agreed. They need to be somewhere and maintained and easy to access. And I don't think like a Mural or a Miro is going to be the answer to that.
No. And it's getting investment as well, isn't it? Into investment from the people above to make sure that it's seen as important, and they invest in people to actually manage and improve these things and get them out there.
Thank you, Izzy. If we could just try and squeeze one more question in, we've got Juan who's got their hand up. Would you like to come in with a quick question?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your presentation, both really interesting. My question has to do with the challenges that you face when doing this type of work. So you mentioned data share in order to streamline services, in order to be able to create these patterns and so on. And I'm wondering the type of things that you have to go through in order to be able to use that data sharing. Presumably, there are issues with, for example, in GDPR, especially if you're working in government, but in any type of big organization, I work in a university, for instance, I wonder how deep do you have to go into, or what kind of hierarchies of people, because I presume you work across collaboration and so on, but how far do you go into the organization in order to click different ends to create these patterns? For example, in the challenge of data sharing, you presumably have to bring to services that are, like you mentioned, applying for a parking permit or being foster parent, very different requirements. But if you want to create these patterns, at some point you have to put them all in one box. So, for example, if it's data sharing, how far do you go into the organization to change things? So is this just a front end type of design that you make, or how far into it do you go in order to make structural changes, if that's such a thing? Thank you. Does that make sense?
The big one.
Yeah. I think you might be describing. I don't think it's something that I've got into yet too much. The sorts of stuff that I've been imagining being published as part of a service pattern would not go near any personal or unshareable information. However, so Department for Work and Pensions have done quite a bit. I don't know if we've got anyone on the call. Actually, I think we do. We have Stephanie on, who've done a bit of thinking about how they want their service patterns to have quite a deep level of information on like software and components that they reuse as well. And I think they want to get closer to seeing how they can use it as a way of structuring things. But I think it would still be at the level of more architecture than specific data points. So if it was relevant to say, you know, this service pattern requires a date of birth data point to make sense, then we can specify that in a way that is safe without actually having to give examples. I've maybe not understood exactly what you're saying, Juan, but maybe one we take offline. Kirsty, do you have any thoughts?
Again, I wonder whether I've not understood the depth of what you're asking within the question. One of the things which it made me think of that we are wanting to get started as an additional experiment is, yes, we talk a lot about patterns at the moment as like that sort of user-based interaction layer in terms of what is a person checking, logging, identifying, applying, paying, is there work to subsequently consider the patterns that are happening at an operational layer within our services and organizations? So how are people receiving, analyzing, calculating, reporting, managing, maintaining? What are the sort of doing words that are happening within our services? Is a bank of patterns to look into, look across, find similarities, work out the wording and structure, and again work with organization, work with all the services to take that back and make that a collaborative effort. And I wonder, in doing that and creating that sort of combined approach to the ways in which we are processing and running our services, that becomes the place where we're then saying, so how do we improve upon them? How do we make sure that when we're analysing or reporting or calculating, we're doing that in the most streamlined manner? How are we learning from each other's best practice? That's the bit that made me think of in our to-do list.
Thanks, Kirsty. Listen, we've just gone past 12, and I can see we're starting to lose quite a few people. So we're going to have to wrap up. There are 3 more questions on the Padlet. If you haven't got to them, please do, because they're the ones that are asking, actually, what do you want this community to be going forward? What sort of support? How often should we meet? What channels should we be using? What sort of activities could we do? So please, if you have a chance and you haven't answered those questions, hop on there. But for now, thank you so much for joining our first call. Thank you, especially to Kirsty, for presenting her excellent work. Please join the mailing list or get in touch on email with any ideas and suggestions you have. And I think that's it for today. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your Thursdays.